Hello everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to make a basic Photoshop script. With this you'll be able to basically create a new document, learn how to create text, add colors, add an image, and all the way to the end step where we're going to print this basically test automated generated image. And as you can see, freshly printed on a black and white printer, yes, but we do have our printed document. So we're going to be going over the basics of Adobe scripting, how we can use it in Photoshop, and some of the things you can begin to access as you learn. Before we get started, I do want to remind you, hit the subscribe button down below, hit the bell icon to be notified of new videos coming out twice weekly in the channel, and down in the description you can follow us on GitHub, check out the code for this, and try it out for yourself. You can also follow us there for coding updates, and in the description, follow us on Instagram for other updates. You can join our Discord server with lots of useful channels like scripting, extensions, plugins, expressions, ask questions, or just hang out. And if you'd like to become a channel member and help us out financially, you can check out the link in the description to become a member, supporter, premium supporter, or a VIP and get cool perks. So if this is your first time scripting ever in an Adobe program, you'll need either Extend Script, which will be linked in the description, or you can use Visual Studio Code, which has some limitations. We're just going to be using Extend Script in this case, which has an easy way to link to Photoshop and directly run and test our script very quickly. So I'll create a new script file, and we're going to begin by learning how to access sort of the open document in Photoshop. The way we're going to do that is by creating a new variable. We can just set this equal to active doc. And I'm going to set this equal to our app, which means the application Photoshop itself. And then I'm going to grab the active document. Now, what I'm going to do is what's called an alert. This will pop up a message on the screen telling me whatever information I give it. So I'm going to alert our active doc. And this is going to pop up. We have a document called My New Photoshop Doc, which is the name of it. And if you wanted to just return the name of it, we could say .name. And as you can see, we're just going to get the name of our open document. From here, we can branch down into the various things that are contained within a document, such as layers, swatches, or anything else. If you are using Extend Script, the built-in Adobe Photoshop object library is very useful, and it contains a ton of different things you can access. As I mentioned, we're going to be starting at the document level, which has all of these things that you can access, read, or modify inside of your document. And we can go down to things like the layers and just look through this guide to see all the possibilities. If you want to access our layers, all we need to do is grab a document object. We have our active doc, and I'm going to go ahead and store this in a variable called layers. And if we alert our layers, we should get an object called layers. We can do things like check how many layers are in it. The way we do that is by checking the length, which we have just one, which is our background layer. So if we go ahead and grab, let's say, the first layer, this is an array of layers, so it starts at index 0, and we're going to say .name. And as you can see, we get background. So that's how you can access your document and layers in Photoshop. Those are sort of the basic ways to read things, but what we're going to do is create something from scratch. So I'm going to create a new document variable, and we're going to set this equal to app.documents, referencing any of the documents in our project, and we're going to add something. So to make a document, we're going to require several arguments to make sure the properties match what we want. First is the width, so we can say, give it a width in pixels or whatever unit you want to use. We'll give it a height, a pixels per inch value, which is basically how dense it is, a name, we can just call this Photoshop Doc, and then we also need a mode. What this basically means is what kind of color do we want to use. If we want to use RGB, we're going to give it new object mode.rgb. We could also give it, say, CMYK. If we wanted to, we would say, as you can see, new document mode.cmyk. And with that, if we simply run it, we're going to create a new document every time we run this script. Now we can go in, add some layers, text, colors, and other things. Now I mentioned that you can access the layers by calling the .layers of a document, but in order to add things like text or images, we need to grab the art layers. So I'm going to create a variable called layers and set this equal to my new document dot art layers. And that is of course in camel case because we're in JavaScript. Now, if we want to add a new layer, it's very similar. We're going to do it very similar to how we added a new document. We can simply say layers.add, and that should just simply add a layer. But this will return the layer, so we can store it in a variable. So we can say new layer is equal to layers.add. If I run this, you can see we're going to create layer 1. If we want to change the name, we can grab the dot name and say maybe my new layer. And when we run it, we will have a new layer with our name. One thing you can do as well is change the type or the kind of the layer. And in order to do this, you just call your layer.kind and set it equal to layerkind.text, layerkind.video. And there's a lot of other options that you can choose from as well. As you can see, we have brightness and contrast and all these other type of Photoshop layers. In this case, we're just going to be using a text layer, so we'll set it to .text. Next, we're going to go even deeper into our layer, and we're going to access sort of anything that involves text within it. In order to access the text inside of it, I'm going to say our layer.text item. And again, we can store this in a variable, so I'll just call the variable text item. And if we go ahead and alert this, we should get an object called text item. And for example, if we wanted to see if there was anything inside of it, we could go through the properties. But because we don't have anything in our text layer yet, as you can see, it is a text layer indeed, as we set it to 1, we need to start filling it with things like information of the contents within it and the color. First, I want to teach you how you can access the fonts in Illustrator. I'm going to create a variable called fonts, and to access all the fonts installed, we simply need to say app.fonts. If you've been around on this channel for a while, you know that I've always used ExtendScript. One thing cool that I've really noticed is Photoshop has autofill in ExtendScript scripting. For example, if I type in new document dot, it will give me all the new document types, but this isn't usually available for, say, like After Effects scripting, so that's very nice. Now, if we alert fonts, we should get a whole list of text fonts. Let's see how many fonts there are by saying fonts.length. That gives us 981 installed fonts. So if we go ahead and just say, pick a random one like font 100 or font 101 in this case, we should get an individual font. In this case, it's called a Cumin variable concept default. Let's go ahead and look inside of our guide here to see what we can access inside of a font. If we go down to F, we actually only have font preview type, so it must be under text font. We have access to the family, the name, the parent, the PostScript name, and the style. And we're actually going to need what's called the PostScript name, which is sort of the in Adobe name to recreate a font. If you wanted to say add a new Times New Roman text, you can't just say Times New Roman. It needs to be the PostScript name, which I believe is like Times New Roman PCT or something. And it's basically like a built-in name that Adobe and the other programs recognize to grab that certain file in that specific font. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a random font for my text that I'm going to create. So I'll say random font, and the way we're going to get a random font is referencing our entire fonts array. And we're going to grab the index math.floor, inside of that math.random, times our fonts.length. What this does is it generates a random number between 1 and 0, multiplies it by the number of fonts we have, 981, and then it rounds that number basically to an integer. And then it grabs that random font index from our massive font array. So it could pick a random number like 99 or 200, and then it's going to grab font number 99 or font number 200 and make that our random font. So if I say alert random font.name, you can see I'm going to get, in this case, strenuous. Next time I'll get a different font, and every time I run this, it will give me a different font. Next, let's take a look at the properties we can access for our text item. Again, this is our object inside of our text layer that's going to represent the text within it. So what can we access? It looks like we have quite a few options here. We're going to look for ones that are useful, like the size and the font. So if we look for font, it looks like we have a string for the font. So what I can do is say text item.font is equal to our random font. But again, the font object is not what we need to apply. We need to apply a string of the PostScript name. So we'll say random font.PostScript name. And then what else can we change? Well, if we want to change the actual text inside so it's not empty, we need to adjust the contents of it, the actual text in the layer as it says here. So we can say text item.contents, and we need to provide a string. So we'll just say, this is my text here. So now if I just go ahead and run this as a test, you can see we're generating some text here with our text chosen. This is my text here. Now let's go ahead and adjust the size and color of this. So let's see that there's a size property. The font size in points, that's actually perfect. So we'll say text item dot size is equal to maybe, since this is a title, let's try 96. And also we want to change the color. So if we go down here, we have the color, which is a solid color. So we'll say text item dot color, and we need to set this to actually something pretty specific. Inside of Photoshop scripting, this solid color object is a little bit complicated. It contains multiple color objects. So since we're in RGB, that's the sort of color formatting we're going to use. I'm going to create a new solid color object since that's what is required. So I'll say my color is equal to new solid color. And since that's an object, we need to construct it with these parentheses. Now inside of my color, we have things like .rgb as properties, .cmyk, and any of the other color spaces possible. So what we can do is say my color.rgb, and that's going to reference the RGB colors of whatever we're going to create here. Since we're using the RGB color space, that's what we're going to do. And I'll store this in a variable called RGB. Now we can simply say RGB.red, RGB.blue, and RGB.green. And of course, that's out of order. But now we can set these values between 0 and 255 color values. So let's go with something super green. Maybe we'll do 0 for red, 255 for green, and we'll add in a little bit of blue. And now this will create a color with whatever spec we put in RGB. If you wanted to change this to say CMYK, you could go in and say var CMYK is equal to my color dot CMYK. As you can see, it's actually going to provide us with that information too, which is super useful. And then you can simply say CMYK dot, and then go through, cyan, magenta, all those, and adjust your CMYK values. But in this case, we're just using RGB. So now we can set our color equal to our my color variable. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a little bit more complicated in Photoshop than other applications. But now if we run this, we're going to get a nice big size 96 text, probably a little too big. Let's try 72. And in this case, it's a nice neon green color. So there's that. And now we're going to need to adjust things like the positioning and make it look a little bit more organized in here. I might reduce this even more. Let's go with 50. And I think that should be good once we actually move the text to center it. So how can we center our text? Well, usually that's a property called alignment or justification. So if we find justification right here, it's going to require a paragraph justification whose object looks like this with these values. So if I grab my text item dot justification, and I'm very happy that I can just fill these in automatically, we're going to set that equal to a justification dot, let's go with a center type justification. And when we do this, it should actually move it over quite a bit, because when you adjust the justification of any text, just by default, it's going to change how it appears like that. So what we need to do now is move the position so that we can center it. In order to position something, it's actually quite easy. If we go back to our text item object here, go down to .position, we can simply provide it with a unit point in terms of what we want the position to be. So I'll say text item.position, And what do we want the position to be? We have an X and a Y value, the X being the sort of width axis and the height being the Y axis. So if we want to move this over to the right quite a bit more, where do we want to move it to? Well, the center. And how do we calculate the center of our document? Well, we simply divide the width by 2. If we have the entire width of our document represented like this, as you can see, it's 2550 pixels. In order to half or get the center, we simply need to cut it in half. So the X position, I'm going to make my new document. Again, we created up here with our predefined size. And I'm going to grab the width divided by 2. Then we'll add a comma because we need our next argument, the Y position. Right now, the Y is actually looking pretty good. We don't have to move it if we don't want to, but I'll go ahead and just move it down to maybe 200. And now let's run this and try it. As you can see, we have a nice centered text, but we can move the position on the X down a bit. Let's try 300. And that looks pretty good. Every time we generate it, we'll have a nice centered green and random font text. Now, before we can flatten all of our layers and print our document, let's add an image because that's pretty much what Photoshop is meant for. But surprisingly, with scripting, adding images is really complicated. So we're going to be using a predefined function I found on the Adobe forums to basically insert any image we give it. But first, we need to define what our image file is going to be coming from. So I'm going to use the same example I used in the actual code here. I'm going to use this stripes image, which is from group 64 from back in like the 20s. And we're going to reference this file on our computer. So I'm going to say var image file is equal to a file object. And where is this located? Well, for me, it's in my pictures, desktop backgrounds, and it's called stripes.jpg. And just to make sure this file is real, I'm going to say alert image file.exists. This will return true if the information you've given it exists, and it will give you false if it does not. In this case, we have true, which is perfect. Now, we only want to insert the image to our script if our image file exists. So I'm going to create an if statement, and we're going to say if our image file.exists, just like the code we just used. If this returns true, we're going to run some code. And the code we're going to run is a custom function. I'm going to copy and paste it here, but essentially you can check out the link here to where this is from. It's called place file, which we simply need to provide it with a file that we want to place. Since we have a valid existing image file, that's perfect. We're going to provide that to this function, which creates a new action descriptor. There's a whole bunch of put path and weird things that I don't quite understand. In the future, if I understand them, of course, I'll go into depth explaining them. But for now, we're just going to copy this code to place our file. So we're going to say place file, and we're going to place our image file. Now, if we run this, you can see now we have an image file put inside of here. And the nice thing is it also creates a layer for that image, so we can go into that layer object later if we want and make modifications like sizing it or moving it around. Now, we have two more things to do, and they're very simple, no special arguments required. We're going to flatten all of our layers, which if you're not familiar, is basically a way to compress them all into one layer. You can right click on all your layers and choose flatten image, and it will create one background image. In order to do this, we're going to take our document dot flatten. If we run this, you can see after we've inserted our image, we're going to flatten everything. And finally, to print, you may be able to guess at this point, we're going to grab our document and say print. Now this will take whatever your default printer in Photoshop is and print it. I've got mine plugged in here. If we run the script, we may get a dialog popping up saying, let's see. I actually already closed the dialog, but you may get a dialog popping up saying that things are a little bit off scale. Would you like to resize or whatever? Just hit proceed and do not show next time. And as you may be able to hear, I have something printing. Let's check it out. As you can see, we've now successfully scripted something in Photoshop from scratch and printed it. If If you guys enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button. Down below, hit subscribe and the bell icon to be notified of new videos coming out twice weekly on the channel. And down in the description, you can check out the code for this, learn for yourself, make modifications, and begin learning Photoshop scripting. Make sure you follow us in GitHub as well for coding updates, and down in the description, you can follow us on Instagram as well for other updates. If you'd like to get more help outside these videos, you can join our Discord server. We have a scripting, extensions, plugins, expressions, and many other channels. And if you want to help support the YouTube channel and get cool perks at the same time, you can become a member, supporter, premium supporter, or VIP, link in the description. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you guys next time.